Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 o'clock, January 29th, and it's Mike Cadieux again from the Procurement Foundry, and we are coming to you live with and people starting to funnel in here really quickly. We are coming to you live with the next in our series of Ask Me Anything AMA. We've got an exciting guest today, one I've been waiting for months. Really excited to talk to Mark Holyoake from Holyoake Search. You probably know him as the #1 guy to talk to when you need a job. He's definitely running one of the biggest, most widely spread search in procurement, strategic supply chain management organizations out there. Mark's got his finger on the pulse of what's happening from a recruiting perspective, what job openings there are. Really, really interesting guy. Mark and I have spoken a couple of times, and I'm so excited to have him and bring him to all of you today. Just a couple of housekeeping tips here, how this all works. Obviously, we're all in a Zoom meeting. We've already got 20 folks in here, Mark. And we've got a webinar chat Zoom panel on the right-hand side. For those of you who want to ask Mark questions, please just ask them inside of the chat on the side. I'll read them as we go along, and I'll present them to Mark on your behalf. I'll give you a quick shout out as we're going along with this today. So anyway, I want to dive right into it because we could probably spend a couple of days with Mark, but his time is really, really tight trying to find people new jobs. I mean, it's just an amazing thing that he does. So Mark, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate you being on the Ask Me Anything for Procurement Foundry.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you very much for the invite. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Mark, can you tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about how you got to where you are today, and kind of the scope and depth of Holyoake Search, and what you're trying to accomplish on a day-to-day?
Sure. So, in summary, I'm the owner, managing director of Holyoake Search. We're obviously a procurement specialist. Recruitment specialist focused on the procurement function. So we'll provide companies across the US with permanent search, executive retained search, and contract staffing services in order to find the very best procurement folks from the analyst through to the chief procurement officer level. And those are companies of all varieties, sizes, industries, and whatnot.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter what vertical they're in or how big they are or where they are located. They're all coming to you trying to find the best talent.
Indeed. We've got big companies, pretty mature, looking to hire for very specialist skills within an already fairly heavily segmented sourcing or category management function. We also have startup companies, growing companies getting to the point where establishing a standalone procurement function for the first time makes some sense. They don't really know where to start. They don't really know where to look. And they're finding it difficult to make a lot of noise and capture the attention of candidates in a market that is extraordinarily busy. Right.
Absolutely. And that's why they're coming to you for your expertise in that marketplace, right?
Yeah, I've been doing this for more than 15 years. I fell into it, as I think a lot of even the best recruiters do.
I saw your post today. You posted that up about true or false, do most recruiters stumble into the career? I saw that.
I think so.
Post on LinkedIn today.
I think so. My job at the time happened to have me asking CFOs what their priority was, and frankly, they didn't need another accounting and finance recruiter in their Rolodex, but they did need to get a better handle on their spend, on their potential risk exposure. And this was back in 2003, 2004. There were manufacturing companies, automotive companies that had been doing this for years, but there were many other companies within the professional services, the financial services, insurance industries that hadn't given this much in the way of any thought. And leading up to the global financial crisis, I think they were, though they didn't know it at the time, really preparing themselves pretty well for what was coming. And they didn't know where to turn. Procurement as an increasingly strategic function was was growing, and it hadn't been met with a corresponding increase in the number of search firms that focused in on this area. And there was a huge need. There was very little in the way of companies out there delivering a solution. And I found myself right in the middle of that, I guess, at the right time. And it's been something I've done and enjoyed ever since.
Yeah, great thing at the right time, right?
Yeah, I'd rather be good than lucky, I guess.
Good. Yeah. So I've got a bunch of things I personally want to ask about the current state of procurement. I want to know whether or not the CV is going to die in a couple of years and people are just going to go to LinkedIn or these crazy videos that people are making. I want to talk about technology and recruiting because I'm hearing about people being interviewed by robots and AI algorithms that are kicking out good candidates on positions. And people are gaming their CVs to potentially game the bot. It's like the fight of the Google search engine on a CV file now. I also want to talk about what people can do to prepare themselves for best positioning in the marketplace to find their next job. I know you and I have spoken offline previously about at what point does it become less about your CV and more about your network and how are people networking? What type of skills are you seeing emerging as the primary skills inside of the marketplace that hiring folks are looking for, be it soft skills or hard skills? Tons of stuff that we can talk about. Let's do this. Let me ask you a little bit about the current state of recruiting inside of procurement and talk a little bit about what some of your clients are looking for. And then we're just going to jump into some questions because I've already got a half a dozen questions lined up for you. So I want to make sure we start jumping in there, and then I'll just filter in some of the other topics that I have as well.
Sure. Well, if you're a job seeker, the market is fantastic. I preface that by saying it is what you make of it, which is to say, if you're sitting at home and waiting for people to contact you, you're not likely to see a whole lot coming your way. The
Right.
market has changed. You need to be out there. You need to be proactive. But for people that have adopted a structured, disciplined approach to their job search, that are committing some time and effort to it, I think it's a wonderful environment for the job seeker. There is an inequity in the number of jobs versus the number of job seekers that favors the job seeker. And
So the talent gap is real, is what you're saying.
it is most certainly real. And it almost seems cliche for someone in my profession to bring that up. I guess it's often an excuse that people in my profession would use to engage us, where companies are struggling to solve those problems by themselves. But the fact is that in 15 years, I've not seen companies having the kind of challenges that they are now finding good people. And it's compounded, that issue is compounded by the fact that most of those companies are still running processes to attract, assess, and engage people that go back to 2008. And the world has changed. Candidates are in demand, and there are certain expectations that they have as to what the process is going to look like. And if your company isn't abiding by those rules, then someone else is. So for a job seeker, it's great. For a company looking to hire talent, it's challenging.
So have we gotten the point yet where we're officially rock stars and we can ask for a jar of green M&Ms on our desks every day, like the guys from Van Halen when they book a concert or something like that? Have we reached that status yet in procurement, or we're still ways away from that?
I think we're close. Well, but let me say this: I share my observations with peers of mine that support other corporate sectors, accounting, finance, legal, technology. Everybody's having, the same issue.
Yeah.
So I think it is absolutely true to say that a very strong procurement professional has the opportunity to ask for an awful lot. I question often whether the company is willing to accede to those demands are always the best places to go. I think that job seekers can still benefit from someone in my profession to help them navigate through the market and point them toward well-established companies that take procurement seriously, are committed to its investment in the long term, and are not simply treating it as a PR exercise or a flash in the pan. And there are plenty of companies, that I put in that mold as well. But yeah, unquestionably, if you want to move, you're committed to moving, you can accomplish a lot financially and professionally speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because, and just so that everybody knows, Mark has been helping advise us on the Procurement Foundry compensation and salary survey, which, by the way, we're going to be dropping next week. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about that, and Mark just kind of touched on it, is the idea of staying put inside of your organization versus job hopping. And there's some really interesting data coming out inside of that survey around the differences of how people are accumulating more and more compensation if they're staying put and rising up through the ranks versus jumping around to get to that senior leadership role that they want over the next 5 to 10 years.
It's a great question. You can't keep moving every year into perpetuity. There comes a point where people are going to look at your resume and question your loyalty, question your decision making, question whether you're going to stay with them for any longer than you've stayed with a previous employer. But there's some merit to moving for financial gain, particularly in a market where it is no longer frowned on the same way that it was to change employers every 12 to 18 months.
Right. I've got a question around that. So, and you said that there's such a strong market right now for the professionals. Do you see the procurement professionals starting to be comped out on meritocracy, or is it still a lot of folks are just, hey, this is my budget. I've got $150,000 in Metro Manhattan for a category manager with 10 years of experience, and I want to pay him $150,000 to $165,000, or is it more of like almost moving more towards a sales model because of the savings opportunities, and hey, we're going to give you targets and we're going to bonus you out on a meritocracy based on targets? Have we made that shift yet? Because I've been wondering when we're going to get there, and if we will get there.
No, we're not there.
Yeah.
I think there's an argument for and against, right? I think there are, what would you call that, a gain share model in effect. I think some companies would argue that has the unintended side effect of having their procurement people focus on a very singular cost-saving metric to the exclusion of just about anything else, on the basis that that's what forms a large part of their incentive compensation.
Right.
But no, at the moment, I see companies putting together packages in a fairly traditional manner. I think the bigger question is sort of how a company assigns a particular number within the salary range to a candidate. Once again, is the question of do we pay someone X amount versus Y because they have more experience, or are we ultimately looking to pay anyone coming in the door, regardless of whether they have 5 or 15 years of experience, the same amount of money because they effectively can do the job to the same standard?
Let's jump into some of the questions that some of the viewers are asking. So first question from Alan Potter says, hey, Mark, I'm mentoring a first-year Rutgers MBA student who has little experience in the supply chain. I'd like to know what you would recommend she should prioritize or what she should learn first.
It's a good question. I'm just reading it through again just to make sure I'm clear what's being asked here.
Oh, sorry. I'm moving it around on you. I apologize.
No, not at all. Well, I mean, ultimately,
Is there a specific skill set they should be thinking about? Should they be thinking more analytics? Should they be thinking more EQ?
Yeah, consider that the lens through which I'm looking is entirely, procurement and not the broader supply chain. So, we'll make the assumption that this person has had the opportunity to learn a little bit more in the real world about the application of their skills within supply chain, logistics, distribution, et
Yeah.
cetera, as well as procurement, and that they've decided that procurement is ultimately the direction that they want to take. I'd recommend two things, truthfully, and this is an MBA student. One, learn the soft skills, right? Because the technical ability is key, but it's not something that's going to differentiate a lot of individuals from others competing for the same roles. So ultimately assess what the major soft skills and behavioral traits are that companies favor, that they try to assess, and make sure that you can demonstrate those with aplomb. And if that requires getting additional, executive coaching, really sitting down with a mentor, not just a manager, but someone that can help, develop you,
Yep.
then I would encourage people to do that. Then figure out what company they're going to
Right.
join after. There's arguments for joining J&J or Unilever, whom can provide a world-class procurement environment to learn from, but where your role, while interesting and touching upon world-class practices, is pretty confined. The gains that you can realize as an individual are somewhat marginal, being as you're a very small cog in a very big machine. Right? Or do you go with a smaller company where the potential upside for proving yourself is that much larger, but you're likely to take on a role in a slightly more autonomous environment with a less obvious career curve? At this point, I think it's just asking a lot of questions about what you want to do next, and where.
And I'm assuming that, first off, I would say kudos to you for getting the MBA. I think I think the salary and compensation survey that we're going to be dropping is going to show that the MBA programs are definitely the way to go in this space. I'm assuming that they're a fairly young MBA student. My recommendation is to try as many flavors of ice cream as you can in the early years of your career, trying to figure out, like Mark said, do you want to be shallow and wide or narrow and deep in your career path, right? Do you want to do the J&J thing where there's 600 to 1,000 people in indirect spend, or supply chain management where there's thousands and you're a cog, or do you and you're getting a lot of experience against a world-class organization? Or do you want to be in a soft, nimble startup where there's 5 or 10 procurement people maybe, and you're getting thrown onto new projects every other week, right? And you're literally learning through exposure on that. So I think that it's great that they're an MBA student. I think EQ soft skills are just the tip of the ice, and they're just not good at it across the board. So I think that any EQ skills that they can pick up along the way, the technical skills, and you can learn a category of spend pretty easily, I think, over time. I think once you know how to buy something or procure something or negotiate something, you can apply that to a lot of other categories. But I think that certainly the fact that they're doing that, again, like you said, a lot of self-awareness, right, as to what you want and where you want to go, right?
I think additionally, if they're open to the idea, following up an MBA with some time spent in the management consulting industry is still a win. It's that combination of consulting and corporate experience is still attractive, amongst the companies that talk to me, and I think it gives you a wonderful opportunity not only to hone your stakeholder development, stakeholder management skills, but the diversity of experience that you can gain in terms of the categories that you touch, the industries that you work in, it's second to none. I think it positions you incredibly well if you can find a consulting company that you like, and if you frankly can deal with the travel.
Yeah, and I think that's a great, wow, that's an amazing point. I think that coming into a consulting firm that's providing procurement services gives you the best of both worlds, and also probably it weaves in a thread of entrepreneurialism, because the consulting practices tend to be more entrepreneurial in mindset, because it's the next project, and it gives you that flavor for that creative entrepreneurial thought process that will help you longer down the road, I think, as well. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. Let's jump into another question. Great recent article on LinkedIn. In it, you talk about establishing relationships with specific recruiters. I have found that unless recruiters have a specific role, they are not likely to be reaching out to candidates. How do I change that, ensure that I stay relevant for the recruiters themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose it's an issue of how the industry is set up. The fact of the matter is we are paid by our clients, and therefore most recruiters are incentivized to go, spend their time on paying activity by talking to candidates whose skills are aligned with a search that you're conducting right now. Don't take it personally.
Yeah.
If we're not calling you, it's not because we don't want to work with you. It's merely that we're not working on a search right now that is a relevant fit. Don't be afraid to check in periodically, and by that, every few weeks. It's
not
fine.
daily, not daily.
But we're going to get into personal branding in a bit. But the reality is that you can keep yourself in front of people in our industry just as readily as your peers and others in the procurement profession by getting out there and contributing to the discussion, amongst the wider procurement community. Because we as recruiters, we take notice. We recognize who's putting themselves out there, who's contributing, who's discussing, who's answering questions, right? Who's sharing articles. And honestly, we have every incentive to talk and pick up the phone with candidates that fit a particular role. But we're on LinkedIn all the time.
Right.
If you're on LinkedIn all the time as well, and we're talking, we're involved in the same dialogues, the same discussions with the same people, you're going to be front of mind.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. You keep yourself relevant and you keep yourself present in the place where the recruiters are, then that makes sense that you're going to be relevant to them. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about, and you just touched on it, personal branding. I think this is a personal branding type question. Any advice how to get recruiters and hiring company HR gatekeepers to not eliminate you from consideration quickly based on specific industry experience and or total spend management? So is there a way for someone to potentially shine if they're lacking some of that experience or don't have a big bucket of spend that they have? And I think that this leads into a discussion around, and I don't know if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that personal branding can help in that area to remove you from the elimination factor if you've got all these other things happening with you on that space.
Yeah, consider that the HR gatekeeper likely doesn't know all that much about procurement, and that's not a knock against them, but they are likely a generalist supporting multiple corporate functions within the business. Their job is simply to take a mandate given to them by a hiring manager and to recruit against a set of very specific screening criteria. So it's incredibly challenging not to have them eliminate you if you don't tick all of those those boxes. And it's not necessarily their fault. It's certainly not yours, but it does highlight the importance of making yourself known to more than just the HR gatekeeper. You know, I think personal branding helps you get in front of, you know, hiring managers to get their attention, where a formal application to a company simply serves as a statement of your interests, as opposed to an attempt to sell them on whether you know are qualified or not for a particular role.
What about
it's difficult because, again, you know, they are getting a lot of applications.
Yeah.
And in isolation, perhaps, you know, they wouldn't eliminate your experience, you know, but when they are getting 100 applications for a single role, and let's even assume that 10 of those are very well qualified, it's difficult. It's difficult to differentiate yourself. Again, I would be treating the application process as merely the start. You know, submitting an application through an HR gatekeeper is step one.
Yeah.
Researching the company, finding out who the hiring manager is, connecting with them, making sure that you are involved in discussions that they might be contributing to as well or aware of. That ultimately, I think, is your responsibility as well. It's very, very easy to do so via LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I just picked it up as you were talking a little bit about that. Outside of manufacturing and risk-adverse industries like financial services, are you seeing growth in procurement roles in other industries, i.e. marketing, software publishers, startups, et cetera?
Yeah, the biggest, certainly startups. Again, you know, we've talked about startups looking to stand up procurement for the first time when they get to a certain size, and we're seeing startups now do that far earlier on in their growth, you know, a maturity cycle than ever before.
Is there a trigger point there? Is it a revenue number? Is it a headcount number? Is there, like, what is the trigger point that's causing them to go, hey, I need a procurement person, I need a generalist to come in here and try to just put some governance strategy and and pull down some of the contracts that are in flight? Like, what's the trigger point that's causing that to happen now? I completely agree. I see it happening much earlier now. I remember companies coming, and they're still out there, seeing companies with 2,000, 5,000 employees with minimal amount of procurement staff. But now I'm also seeing startups with 200, 300 people, and procurement's right at the head of the table. So I'm starting to see that trend as well. What do you think are some of the trigger points that are causing them to think about that? And when is that happening?
Yeah, from where I see, it's usually around 600 to 700 people. Though
Yeah.
I'm sure there's no shortage of examples where there are companies that are smaller than that looking to invest in strategic procurement for the first time. But it'll usually start, you know, supporting an area of the business that is vital to their ongoing sort of commercial strategies. So let's say we're talking about a tech trading, you know, tech-based or research-based trading firm. You know, they're going to be looking for someone to support technology, software, and services pretty early on. It's just too important to ignore.
Yeah. Yep.
Again, it's just far early. I think outside of that, the not-for-profit sector, the philanthropic sector, the higher education sector, the arts, you know, we're seeing an awful lot of companies that I would have considered laggards in the past in terms of instituting strategic procurement processes, really looking pretty seriously at that now. You just have to look at some of the major educational institutions, you know, in the New York, New Jersey area, you know, where I physically sit, and a lot of those have hired a legitimate chief procurement officer level individual inside of the last 12 months, even as an upgrade to perhaps their prior efforts to establish, you know, a procurement lead, you know, at the director level. So they've upgraded things significantly.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that. I see a lot more people becoming CPOs of academia all of a sudden. It seems like it's a really hot market, and obviously probably one that was a laggard, like you said, for a long time. And now people are starting to realize, hey, we can really make a difference here in cost operational efficiencies, even in academia. And you're starting to get some people that are migrating from corporate America over into academia and apply some of those skill sets. So I've definitely seen that. I just in the number of people and the job titles that I see, because I'm on LinkedIn like you know, about 50% of my day it seems to be on LinkedIn. So yeah, that's a really interesting. So definitely some key industries that are racing to catch up and are no longer behind in the hiring and in looking for expertise in that field. Really, really interesting. All right, let's talk a little bit. I'm going to get back to some questions in a second. Mark, one of the topics that we wanted to talk about was, and we talked a little bit about technology in the recruiting practice with 100 people. You know, there's people that have got bots now that can get on to job boards and post their resume to every job that has these 5 keywords and things like that. I want to talk a little bit about technology in the recruiting process and your thoughts around it. Where are you seeing it from an evolutionary perspective? Because I'm hearing about people that are being interviewed by bots, and it's almost inhumane, right? And people are like, oh my God, I hung up the phone. I thought it was, you know, I thought it was somebody trying to sell me dishwasher detergent or get, you know, money wired to someplace because my nephew just got kidnapped. And all of a sudden now it's, oh man, that was actually the interview bot that wanted to ask me some questions, you know, as a precursor. So where is technology right now in the recruiting process, in your opinion, and what should we know about that?
I think technology has some very useful applications within the recruitment process from an efficiency standpoint. You can cover a lot of ground very quickly, and that has some merit sometimes. But I think ultimately at the point at which it's trying to replace, you know, a more finely nuanced conversation that has traditionally taken place between 2 people, I think it falls flat on its face at the moment. And that isn't to say that the technology is not going to get better. I'm sure that it will, but right now it is so far off as to suggest to me anyway that we've got a little ways to go. I hear, as do you, anecdotally stories of people that have been through these processes, but in terms of the whole, you know, it represents a minute portion of the way most companies are approaching this. Quick, efficient, effective hiring, I think, is very different a notion to deliberate, careful, considerate hiring. And I think at the level that we're talking about, professional level roles, niche roles within an important, strategically important, rather complex part of the business like procurement, I think technology fares far worse than it would for, again, more high volume type recruitment, administrative, warehouse, you know, related recruitment, for which I'm sure that it works a lot better.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. As you're talking, I'm running through a couple of the questions. I want to make sure that we try and get to everybody. Thank you all, by the way, for all of your input so far. Really great questions coming in both over the QA feed and also in the chat feed. Going back to tech for a second, Mark, what about some of the technology that's being used to potentially evaluate candidates before they get to that human touch stage? Do you see that gaining traction? Is there something that we should know about that? Is there a way for us to position ourselves better in that arena? And that probably could segue into a conversation around, at what point am I just tossing another resume on the pile versus, you know, now I'm in my 3rd job, I'm mid-management, and I'm starting to look for director level positioning. And does that now go from, hey, I'm answering a job rec, to I'm finding somebody in my network who has an opening or hears about an opening, and that's how I'm coming in? So can we talk a little bit about potentially some of the tech, and then let's talk a little bit more about what the strategy should be at what level of the game that you're playing at?
I think again, the tech has some value when applied in the right way. There is obviously only so much that a paper document can tell me or anybody else about an individual,
Right.
About them as a human, beyond, you know, about their approach, about their thinking, about their communication style, about their polish. Right? I can only get so much from a resume. So if there's a tool out there that's going to help me get a far more complete understanding of an individual, it's probably a good use of their time and mine to try to uncover that early on in the process. And I think companies are getting better, and the technology is getting better. The question, of course, is, you know, what do you do if you're an active job seeker? Because already putting an application in at most companies is a 30 to 45-minute affair, and it's a duplication of, you know, all of the information that's already, you know, in the resume that you sent them. So tacking on, you know, an hour-long video interview and all of the preparation that you're going to put in to go in, you know, to that prior, before anyone has even told you the first thing about the details of the job, what the job pays, before you've ever spoken to a human at the other end of the phone, and try to assess whether that company is a good fit for you, not merely if you're a good fit for them. I think it's off-putting to a lot of people, and it's more than most people are willing to sort of invest their time in. Yeah. So I think at some point, you know, we need to make sure that the human touch doesn't fall off the radar here.
That's really interesting that you say that. I had somebody reach out to me very recently, a good friend, and said, I'm going through the process right now, and I'm on my 9th interview with this company. And I'm like, I can't. I mean, I haven't interviewed for a job in a very, very long time. And now that I'm out on my own with my own thing in the Procurement Foundry, I don't see myself ever going through the interview process again. But if I have to interview with 9 people, I might just call up and go, listen, I'm sorry, this isn't for me. You know?
I think you have to, right? I think there are some companies, albeit maybe fewer than before, who almost pride themselves on the rigor of their interview processes, and habitually bring people in 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and justify that by pointing to retention numbers as sort of as a justification to, you know, to how they're approaching the evaluation process. But no, I think it's ridiculous, right? I think for the most part, companies that are doing it that way are doing it because they haven't given enough thought up front to exactly what the process is going to be, who's going to be involved in the process, and who ultimately is the decision maker. And so what they have is an individual come in over multiple sessions to interview with 10 different people, all of whom are asking the exact same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same interview 10 times, right? And what it sounds like is, it's like, okay, listen, if you can get through 10 of these annoyingly boring interviews where we're going to ask you exactly the same thing, and none of us are going to share the information from the prior interview so that you don't ask repetitive questions, and you can actually survive 8 to 10 interviews, maybe you might survive the bureaucracy of the company that you're about to join.
Well, that's right? It. You know, and that's where technology actually, I think, can come in, right? If it's done right, if an individual is contacted, welcomed to the process, and it's explained to them that the next step before they go in for an on-site, you know, interview will be a series of questions asked to them via video that they will record. But that will be followed by a singular session lasting a couple of hours. It's very structured. That's very consistent. That's very predictable. After which a decision is going to be made on whether they're, you know, getting an offer or not. Then I think most people would say yes.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they can do a video interview within the comfort of their own home in the evening, and they're merely taking off a couple of hours for a singular interview, after which, they know precisely, when they're going to get feedback. And I think that's treating people and their time with the necessary amount of respect. So again, I think technology can be a very good solution. I just think that companies right now are still in this period where they don't know what quite to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of technology that seems sort of sexy, but the application is spotty at best.
I think it's funny, and it's probably an interesting problem for a lot of procurement people who are in the process of purchasing HR related systems and support systems, where there are some really interesting tools out there that will help in the recruiting process and aggregates all the data of all the different interviews that took place and the feedback and all that. And if you're interviewing for a role at a company whose system is so disjointed, you probably want to go, hey, and by the way, you might want to actually, buy this product because this process is horrible. Right?
Absolutely.
I just negotiated a deal for my former employer for this process to improve this process. You really need this product, right?
Agreed. Now, we talked a little, about kind of the future of the resume.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Is the resume here to stay, or do we see that changing? And for me, I think it's staying put for a while.
Okay.
Personally, while a LinkedIn profile I think can be a very adequate stand-in or substitute for a resume, and it arguably even allows for a reader to get a more well-rounded view of a person, mutual connections, endorsements, recommendations. The fact is that from an HR standpoint, as we talked about, they want a consistent one-size-fits-all approach to assessing incoming
they need something,
applications, right? And the fact is, at the moment, a lot of people, for as many people as there are on LinkedIn, there are a lot that are not, or have very, very incomplete profiles. By contrast, resumes are ubiquitous, right? They're able to be kept confidential, and they work with all of these existing applicant tracking systems that companies have spent an awful lot of money in implementing. Right? For me,
is that a tip? I'm sorry, hold on one second. Is that a tip that you'd give people? I tell people this all the time. I look at their LinkedIn profiles and I'm like, senior procurement manager at X, Y, and Z company from 2015 to 2019 doesn't really help me much. You know what I mean? Do you recommend that people get a little bit more in depth with their online profile data, or do you think they should be holding that back?
Well, listen, it has to respect any non-disclosure agreements that they have with their current company. So perhaps stop short of including really specific deal sort of information. But absolutely, I think everybody should be including everything. I don't see the harm. I think perhaps once, in the past, sure, having a complete LinkedIn profile might have raised a few eyebrows amongst your current organization or your manager. It might have suggested that you were looking for a role even if you weren't, and so people shied away from doing that. They didn't want to appear to be job seeking whether they were or whether they weren't. I think those days are behind us. I think LinkedIn is a powerful tool, and sure, job seeking is one of its uses, but this is a wider professional networking and branding tool for individuals and the companies for which they work. If you are not on LinkedIn, people are not finding you. I would encourage people, if they don't have a complete up-to-date profile, to put one together.
Get a picture on there too, right?
Well, I think both LinkedIn and I think resumes can be a very effective way of showcasing people's experience when done right. And since it actually takes real effort to put together a resume or a a LinkedIn profile that stands out, I do think it rewards the individual. It rewards the candidate that actually puts that effort in.
So great point. Where can people find a good example of a standout resume? And because I've seen some resumes, now that I'm running a very large online community, everybody thinks I know where all the jobs are, which is great. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And most of the time I just say, just call Mark, right? Um, so I apologize for the constant stream of traffic that I'm pushing to you. But at the same time, I see a lot of CVs now that I wasn't before because of kind of where I am in the market. And I see CVs that look like, stuff that has more traditional stuff that kind of came up through the years that I was doing it. And now I'm seeing stuff that almost looks like an infographic, infomercial, like the back of a Cheerios box. And I think it's great if you're a media design and studio person, because you're going into marketing or you're going into that space, and that's something that maybe a hiring manager is looking for. But like, it's all over the board, man. What do you have any recommendations for people in that space? Stay traditional, get crazy. What should they do?
Me, I think more is less. Honestly, I can't stand the infographic stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's distracting. I would go for a traditional chronological resume. I understand if somebody has an atypical background, they might want to highlight competencies over the jobs that they've had.
Right.
Being as though what they've learned is a stronger indicator of what they're capable of doing, not merely what they've done before. I get that, but for me, the journey is just as important as what you've done at each role. I think people that have made deliberate moves, that can tell me that they did more than just follow the money, have a far more interesting story to tell. And
you don't want to see a pie chart of people's EQ qualities. I love those. It's like, I'm 35%, listener and 25% evaluator, and I'm like, I just need to know where you worked and what you covered, man. That's just what I need to know.
I think, listen, two things. One, well, maybe three things. If you're going to just keep adding to your resume every time you come to start a job search, then the resume is going to get very long, very quickly, and it's going to give equal importance and real estate to a job that you may have done 20 years ago versus what you are doing today. And that is a poorly written resume, right? Ultimately, you need to take it and look at it with a fresh set of eyes every single time you come to update it. You need to focus upon the kind of role that you're applying for now. Let's say you were a senior associate looking to be a manager. Well, now you're a manager looking to be a director. It's a different skill set, and companies are evaluating you against a different set of criteria. So you need to adjust the positioning on the resume. You need to include not just what you do, but what you have accomplished, objective evidence as to what you did and how you did it, whether that was savings goals, whether that was earning procurement a seat at the table, whatever it was. And then you need to hold that finished product up to the same standard that you expect of the applications that come across your desk as a hiring manager. Because I speak to far too many senior people who ask for an awful lot from us, but when we talk to them about how they present their own experience, there's a huge difference in quality.
Right. Let me jump through a couple of these questions really quick. I think there's something we can answer really quickly. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I still have a couple more things I want to ask you. Is there anything we can do about ghosting by a potential employer, meaning no indication after 2 to 3 interviews?
Good question. Happens to us. We get candidates ghost us. We get companies ghost us. We ask for feedback that is not forthcoming. Truthfully, I don't know that there's an awful lot that we can do at an individual level to change that. I hope that there's some momentum gathering in the industry to hold people accountable,
Yeah.
and to treat people with the respect that they deserve when they've invested a lot of time in a process, only to never hear back. But it's tricky, and we run into the very same problems.
I think there's an opportunity for me as a community owner to offer a place inside of my community for people to vet. I don't want it to become like a trashing session, but certainly for people to know, hey, listen, I was interviewing with this and I went through 4 and didn't hear anything back. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to be interviewing at this company, this is what you should expect to kind of set some. And I think there are places for that already out there on some of the more open, what's the name of the, I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. Some of the other websites that you can go to get background information on the companies. Glassdoor. Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it, Glassdoor. But I think, Glassdoor tends to be wide open versus where Procurement Foundry is a closed-knit community, and you might get more feedback and more intimate feedback and be able to actually DM people. So I'm thinking in my head how I might be able to fix some of that with what I have available to the market with my community members.
I think some people get a little nervous about following up, pressing HR business partners, recruiters, or hiring managers for information that they've not given, readily, such as feedback.
Yeah.
On the basis that somehow it's going to upset that individual, that it's going to make them view their application, more negatively. For me, I'm happy to call people out on this stuff. If you're going to go spend time with the hiring manager or an internal recruiter, follow up with them after the conversation and politely but persistently continue to follow up with them and make sure that you're getting the necessary feedback. I think most of those individuals do genuinely want to provide it, are happy to provide it, and just find that providing feedback, unfortunately, ends up toward the bottom of a long list of things to do. And sometimes, those people are not that comfortable providing negative or constructive feedback, and they therefore just ignore the issue altogether. I think encouraging people that you expect feedback, and that it's okay to provide you with feedback even if it's not so positive, because it's going to be of use to you. I think is a good way to go.
So quickly, because I want to get through the last couple of them here, and then I want to talk to you about the importance of networking. Types of backgrounds that we talked about. You started talking about startups and how startups are really hot in the marketplace right now. We got a question about startups. What are the preferred backgrounds that startups are looking for, in your opinion? Are they looking for a track record of other startups that they've helped with, or coming out of best-in-class J&Js who can take that strategy and apply it to a startup? Where do you think the best candidates for startups are coming out of right now? Or I should say, what are the startups seeing as probably their best fit?
Sure. I often find, and this is a bit of it's a bit all over the map, truthfully. I think largely it's the behaviors that the candidate exhibits, and using that as a leading indicator to whether they're likely to be successful in a startup environment is actually more important than where they came from, because I think you have plenty of people with that entrepreneurial sort of attitude at a big, J&J or a Unilever or whomever. I think the opposite is true. So as a blanket statement, we often see the heads of procurement being brought in from bigger companies who know what good looks like, have a rigorous idea of how to implement a sourcing process within an environment that doesn't have that process, that's with a large degree of ambiguity today.
Yeah.
But underneath the head of procurement, I think commonly it's hiring individuals from other
Other startups.
or at least other organizations where both strategic sourcing and very much more transactional purchasing responsibilities were expected from the very same people, right? Because there is a sense that hiring someone from a big, mature organization where their role was very strategic, it gets you an awful lot until it comes time to tell that person to process a PO, and then they're ready to walk out the door. So more often than not, I think it's an interview process based upon attitude, on entrepreneurial spirit, on a willingness to roll your sleeves up and get stuck in. And again, whilst those people can come from big companies or small companies, we do see startups hiring from a lot of other smaller shops.
Question for you on that: yes or no? Are you seeing senior leaders in other organizations that are going to startups getting an equity position, kind of like some of the other C-level executives?
Yes.
Okay. Another yes/no question, because I'm running out of time with you. Do you get approached, and is there a marketplace for senior executives in the procurement and supply chain management space to hire headhunters, and or is there a buyer's agent model to this that we're not aware of right now versus what you do, where someone can come to you and say, hey, listen, I'm looking to go out to the market and specifically, very selectively look for a new market? Is there a service that people buy into on that front? Do you offer that service, or is it still just a one-way street on that?
There are companies that provide that service.
Yep.
I wouldn't touch them with the 10-foot pole.
Yep.
But that is not to say that there aren't some, exceptionally good companies in that industry.
Okay.
It's just far, far smaller an industry than that which I am. I mean, regardless of the fact, that companies are paying, our bills and not candidates, it doesn't mean that we don't have this huge incentive to assist candidates, through the process, to help them with their resume, to help prepare them for an interview, to advocate on behalf of a candidate to specific companies in our network whom we think may find that person's background to be appealing, whether or not that company expressed that they had any specific roles open at this point in time or not. I just don't see the added value that you get from one of those other types of companies when you're having to shell out several $1,000s with very little in the way of guaranteed returns.
Yep, I understand that. We're almost out of time. One last final thought for you for the day. What if everything that we discussed, what is the one thing that, if you can give everybody that's watching one piece of advice towards their goals and their commitments in making sure that they position themselves properly for either a search or a long-term positioning, what do you suggest? What's the one piece of advice you always give people?
Right now, it's personal branding.
Yeah.
We did a piece on this recently. I can't stress it enough. You have to get over the fact that personal branding is no longer this ego-driven exercise, and it is now a business imperative, right? As soon as you do that, I think it's far easier to get comfortable with putting yourself out there and sharing what you do and what you know with the wider community. And why do it? Because despite all the good work that people in my profession are doing, right? And I think the advantages that can be gained by partnering with a really strong recruiter, the fact is that a lot of career opportunities are going to come your way through your existing business relationships, right? And while networking is a great way to expand your relationships, it's all outbound. It's one-to-one. You go reach out to someone new, and now you have one extra contact, right? By contrast, the personal branding raises your visibility. It raises your reputation far beyond your own direct efforts to contact people. And I think that has the potential to benefit you in many different ways, whether your goal is to speak more often at a public event, whether it is to raise your visibility within your own company, to find the opportunities that never get advertised and the ones that don't get hundreds of applications to them, and be the first call that companies make,
Right.
simply because you are everywhere, and it doesn't take a lot of work. You don't need to start making daily vlogs. You can start with contributing to the discussion on LinkedIn, on Procurement Foundry. There's a million ways of doing it. And right now you have this sort of early adopters advantage because not very many people are doing it.
Yeah.
And I think I would say invest in yourself, in your own career, in your own visibility in the wider community now, long before it gets to the point where you need to have that network to really rely on for job search.
Yeah. Gather the network now while you can, because it's going to get a lot more difficult over time, I think.
And platforms like LinkedIn right now are ripe for it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're out of time. Mark, thank you so much. We could probably talk for another 2 hours. I'd love to have you back at some point in time. Thank you for all your help with everything that you're doing for Procurement Foundry and the information associated with the salary and compensation survey that we're putting out. Mark's been just amazing in helping us with that, so thanks to you for that. And thank you for taking the time to answer the questions from our audience today. And for those of you who didn't get a chance, or for those of you who are talking to other folks inside of the community, we're going to be posting this up so that people who didn't get a chance to do that over the lunch break can see it as well. I'm sure you'll see a lot more, Mark. We're going to do some other collaborations together, I'm sure of it. Thank you again, Mark. Really appreciate your time. Have a great, great day.
Thank you for having me. And if there was anyone that thinks of a question after the fact, or they weren't able to get a question answered, I'm not a difficult person to find.
Yeah.
Please look me up. We'll get some time, and we'll get your questions answered. Happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.